I'm Tim Monroe, and this is what I really want to talk about. There's something fascinating about every single one of us. Everybody has a passion and a story to tell, something that lights them up. Every week I sit down with interesting people and we talk about the things that really matter to them and to all of us. It might be funny, it might be weighty, it might be weird. It's what I really want to talk about. Today I'm talking to Katie Startzman. Katie Startzman is a wife and a mom and the founder and owner of Native Bagel and Nightjar, two very successful eateries here in Berea, Kentucky. She went from operating a food truck to running an amazing brick-and-mortar restaurant in spectacular fashion. She's a member of the Berea City Council and a business coach with the Kentucky Small Business Development Center. She is also the author, and this is my favorite part of her bio, of the Knitted Slipper Book, an everything you need to know guide to making this exciting variation on the sock. This eclectic collection of 30 designs will provide you with all the instruction you need to make moccasins, mucklucks, clogs, ballet flats, boots, booties, or even Mary Janes. Mm-hmm. She's also a graduate of Berea College with a degree in English. We have that in common, not Berea, but English. Mm-hmm. A Renaissance woman, if there ever was one. Welcome, Katie.
Cool.
What do you really want to talk about today?
I really want to talk about gardening, specifically the new Perennial movement and public gardens.
Cool. Okay. So let's dive into that or dig into that.
Sure.
Pun intended, dad joke intended. But let's back up just a little bit and maybe you can tell us sort of quick a story of how your restaurants sort of came to be.
Sure.
They've, I think, quickly become a very important part of this community. So what's that story?
Well, I love that you brought up the Knitted Slipper Book.
Yeah.
Because it relates to that. So that was really the first, I had jobs before that. If you live in Berea, at some point you have to work at a nonprofit. I think it's just the law. There's so many nonprofits
Yeah.
here. I'd worked at a nonprofit, but then I was a stay-at-home mom with my kids, and I wanted to do a creative project. I was designing knitting patterns and selling them online. And in that space, the kind of definition of success is to write a knitting book. So I wrote a proposal to an editor who I really admired with Abrams, and not really realizing kind of what a crazy thing it is to send an unsolicited proposal to a book editor. But she accepted my proposal, and I ended up writing a book, and it was a huge project. It was very rewarding, but I also was sitting by myself in front of a computer knitting and doing math for almost a year. And I loved it, and I was proud of it, but also I felt very disconnected from my community. I had put my kids in school. I had been homeschooling them. And I think at that point I really realized I wanted to do something that was more involved with the physical community around me. And so I started the community garden that still exists up by the Berea College Hospital. That was like a fun volunteer project. But then after that, I was really thinking about how can my husband and I kind of create our own jobs. I think sometimes if you're not an academic or working at one of those nonprofits, it can be hard to find a professional job in Berea. And but fundamentally, we are both romantics about mom and pop businesses. Michael grew up in Berea. He has fond memories going to B&B Grocery or some of the other shops on the College Square. There was a general store called Wanamaker's that my siblings and I went to get penny candy. So businesses like that are creating memories for families, and it's all about the human connection, and that's really what we were going for when we started the bagel business.
Yeah. And so at first it was a food truck, right?
So it was actually smaller than that. It was a little cart.
Okay.
So I built a hot dog cart from plans I found online, and that's what we took to the farmer's market.
Like the ones you see in New York City.
Yeah, I could tow it behind my minivan.
Yeah.
And I always say that doing food service like that, it's like camping, but then you're making food for hundreds of people because, we always forgot a spatula or something. So,
Right.
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that's cool. And so how long were you on a cart?
We did that for one season.
Okay.
And at first it was going to be just like my side hustle, fun project. I didn't actually start out thinking about having a restaurant, but I just wanted there to be some cool new food in Berea, and we wanted to kind of just bring this neat thing to Berea. Yeah. But just after a few months, we realized that we could turn it into a brick and mortar, and we were not well capitalized, to say the least. We did a small Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign and borrowed $5,000 from Mountain Association. And then we were able to move into our first brick and mortar location, which is in the Powell building. There's currently a barber shop there now.
Yeah.
So that was a tiny little spot. It had 12 seats, but that really kind of proved our concept that we could last as a brick and mortar. My husband resigned from his job as a graphic designer, and then we were able to buy the building we're in now in 2018.
Wow.
So I'm really grateful that we,
Yeah. And this is going to be sort of the start of the segue, but
sure.
I've only been here for 2 years. We've only been here for 2 years, but I feel like when you're at Native Bagel in the morning or even Nightjar in the evening, it's kind of more than a restaurant. I think it's become sort of a community gathering space, which is sort of what you were referring to before. And I don't know how that happens, but was that sort of intentional?
Yeah.
Did you sort of think about it that way?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I know this book is so well known. It's like a cliche, but Setting the Table by Danny Meyer is like the classic book about hospitality.
Okay.
And I just have, so that book is kind of about hospitality from a professional standpoint, but also being warm and generous, but also like that's my personality.
Yeah.
And I think that when we started the business, it was my husband and I and one other employee, Holden, who actually was also a Berea College graduate and still lives in Berea.
Yeah.
So it was us opening the doors and welcoming people into our space. So it really had my sense of like what I wanted the culture of the restaurant to be.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that's been the most important to me to transmit now that I'm not there, to transmit to our management and our staff.
Right.
We really like to hire, people who do best and who last the longest with us are people who feel the same way, who want to welcome our community, who there's like a list behind the counter of some of our regulars and it's all their birthdays. Like I didn't ask them to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that not just customers, but our staff, like we're all kind of hungry for that kind of connection and sense of belonging. And
Yeah, it's amazing. And so there's this concept of third spaces, which you probably know what that means. So like home is a first space, work is a second space, and then anything else where people get together is like third space. So it could be a restaurant, it could be church.
Right.
Back in the day, it might have been a bowling league,
Right.
or that kind of thing.
Totally.
Or some club you belong to. And those seem to be getting less and less and having less and less influence on our culture. And your restaurant, I think, feels like a nice third space for people. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
And I think that relates to what we want to talk about today
Sure.
is the gardens. Let's start at the beginning. So when did you sort of first understand that either just a backyard garden or a public garden or whatever it was interesting to you or felt important to you?
Sure. I think I was thinking about that before we started talking, and I think my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, owned a Pennsylvania Dutch farm in eastern Pennsylvania. And it was the kind of farm that had like a little building for every purpose. Like there's a carpenter shop, a smokehouse, a wash house. And there were plantings there and like perennials. It wasn't super well tended, but perennials, special poppies that had lasted forever, ferns. And so that felt like kind of a magical space. And we also had free reign at that farm. So both of my grandparents were Depression era folks who saved a lot of stuff. And so there was good junk around. There were good spaces to explore and that kind of thing. And I think we had a lot of autonomy to clean out a junky space and set it up like we want it to be set up, or, build a fort in the woods and make a little path through the woods or that kind of thing. So I think that sense of like creativity and autonomy and like creating a space was really so some about gardening, but also some about like the space and creating this vision. I think that's the first thing. And then also growing up in the Northeast, my mom loved Longwood Gardens, and she grew up going to Longwood Gardens, which
That's in Philadelphia.
yeah, and it was the home of the DuPont family, and it was his private space. And now it's actually not public. You have to pay to get it.
Yeah.
But going there in February, the feeling if you've ever lived somewhere where it snows, just that feeling in February or March where you're like, I just can't take it anymore,
Yes.
And I'm ready for
I
spring.
grew up in Chicago.
Okay, so you know well,
Yeah.
So there's this huge conservatory, and there's even like this big lawn, and I just remember going there as a kid, and so that felt really special. So I think that was another piece of it. And then I will also say, like, I was a teenager when Martha Stewart was really hitting her stride. And I remember babysitting and reading back issues of that magazine. And I think that kind of aesthetic and emphasis on outdoors and making food yourself, not making food, growing food yourself and that kind of thing also impacted me.
So you're growing up in outside of Philadelphia, like eastern Pennsylvania. Okay. A very rural area or suburban or?
That's what's funny about that part of the world, right? Like we live very rural. It was close to Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and the Delaware Water Gap. We moved around a little bit.
Okay.
But then you're like an hour and a half away from New York City to go to Yankees games,
Right.
yes, quite rural.
Okay.
Yes.
And did you become a gardener early on in life, or is that something that came later?
I remember buying special perennial plants for my mom for Mother's Day when I was still in high school. And then I actually got married when I was still in college.
Okay.
And I started a garden when I was 20.
Okay.
And it's really funny. My twin sister Laura and I, Laura's also an avid gardener. We talk about that a lot. Like when you've been learning something for your whole adult life, you take for granted how much you've gleaned.
Yes.
And I remember just a few special books like this. I mean, the internet was a baby thing. We did not have it at my house. Just a few special books that I basically just pored over. The Gardener's Almanac by Barbara Damarosh. Like that book was like my Bible. And I remember just referring to that so much and just, researching and growing stuff. And I think that, so yeah, I've been gardening my whole adult life.
Yeah, I think the sort of, and this wasn't true in my life. Like I things were passed down from my mom and dad, but things like gardening and cooking wasn't one of those things. But my wife, oh my God, like her mother was Martha Stewart before Martha Stewart was Martha Stewart.
Oh, right.
And so she was an unbelievable home cook, an incredible gardener, homemaker, also worked as a nurse, but had these like incredible skills and she had 4 daughters that these girls just soaked up.
Yeah, neat. I love that.
And like, I love to cook, but Cheryl never has to look at she never looks at a cookbook. She just makes it, and it's amazing. And I don't know how she does it, but because she soaked it up from her mom and her grandmothers, and I just really think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah.
So you start sort of your interest in gardening early on. And can you remember like the first time you sort of had like your own garden somewhere where it was like your space?
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was first married, and my parents actually bought a house and we were renting it from them over on Neely Street off Big Hill Road. And I created a potager style garden. And
what is that?
So it's just like a kitchen garden that's kind of broken up into beds.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be like a vegetable garden, but not just big rows, like a traditional garden. It's like supposed to be aesthetically pleasing as well as productive. And also, ironically, my sister Laura had gotten some kind of grant or special project from the art department. It was a summer project, and she grew a dye garden because she was a fiber artist. And we put that dye garden on the side of my main garden. And so I remember working with her to like plant out the dahlias, the marigolds, the other plants that she could use as a dye for dyeing for her garden. So that was my first garden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I love this idea of, and maybe this is a good segue into talking about perennials, but the idea of productive and aesthetically pleasing at the same time. So what's that like? What's that look like for you? Like when you say you're a gardener, is it flowers? Is it vegetables? Is it herbs? Is it things you eat, or just like beautiful landscape?
Right.
Yeah,
that's funny. That's definitely shifted for me over the years.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law is Mary Startzman, and she has a large garden in her backyard. And
I've heard rumors.
She has.
I've heard of that. I have to see it.
It's a great place.
Yeah.
And kind of like off the wall. Like I couldn't try to match her energy. It's amazing. But I always used to tease her because I started out, as a, what's the word? Like idealistic, young vegetarian, recent graduate, who was growing all vegetables. And I would grow a few flowers, but I was like, we got to focus on what's important here. And she had her beautiful garden and would grow 2 cherry tomatoes in a container. But other than that, it was all flowers, roses, and some herbs, maybe some herbs. And it's over the years I've become more and more like her because I just for different reasons. But now this year I have to chuckle because I'm putting in a big perennial garden, and I have 2 cherry tomatoes in a container, and that's the only vegetables I have. And I have a CSA to Lazy 8 Stock Farm, and I don't need to grow vegetables.
So you're just starting a new perennial garden now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the past 2 years, I was really interested. I think I love the restaurant. I'm super proud of it, but also the way my brain works, I get tired of something and I want to move on. And I think one of the reasons why we've had the restaurant for so long, it'll be 10 years next year that we've had the food business, is that there's always something changing. You're never done with a restaurant.
Yeah.
You never solve it, But I was tired of thinking about that, and I wanted to think about my own creative project. And so I took a lot of time to research. I took some online classes and books about flower farming. never as a way to make money because
Right.
I'm not silly enough to know that I
Right.
could, but just as like a joy project. And I found land to rent in town, and I grew cut flowers on a 1/4 acre for 2 years. Which doesn't sound like that much, but that's a lot of flowers, and a lot of seed starting and,
Sure.
just learning about the production and spacing and that kind of thing, which I love learning about new things. It was very rewarding. But unfortunately, I lost access to that property.
Oh.
So I just have a small house, a lot on Jackson Street, and I just decided that I wanted to cram as much as I could into where I live.
Yeah.
And so, yes. And so I mentioned it earlier before we started recording, but this last July, I went on a trip with Mountain Association to a conference because I was helping them with the project. And I got up early in the morning and I walked down to the Lurie Garden, which is a garden that Pete Eldoff designed that's right close to Cloud Gate and Millennium Park.
In Chicago.
In Chicago,
Yeah.
sorry, yes. And it was 6:30 in the morning. It was real misty. It's been super hot, so it was like really humid, but they also had sprinklers going because it had been so dry. And I was the only person in the garden. And it just felt like, and I had never been there before.
Yeah.
The only other garden of his that I had been to was the Highline once, It was just so magical. It felt like this secret garden. It's enclosed by these high, what's the word? Like, not but anyway, these manicured, grown walls. And I was there for hours. And as the morning went on, the staff came out and picked up the sprinklers. So I felt like I was getting some behind the scenes things. I was there so early, And I was just taking pictures of different plants to identify them. But then it was also cool to see so many of the plants that I recognized, that I already knew. And I don't know, it just was so neat. And my twin sister Laura is always kind of ahead of me. She's always cooler than me. She always knows about stuff. And she had put in a big native plant garden a couple years before. They live outside of town off Red Lick, so they have property to do like a big, expansive native plant garden. So, and she already had some books about this type of planting, and so I kind of was off to the races after that.
That's cool. So you're starting a perennial garden. Talk about for the uninitiated, people like me, and I only know this stuff from my wife, but the difference between an annual garden and a perennial garden.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
So, and I actually worked at the potty shed for a couple of years in exchange for plants. So you're not alone. Lots of people have that question. So, when, the hanging baskets, the annuals that people put out in their window boxes, that kind of thing, they're only going to last for 1 year, either just because that's their life cycle, or they're not hardy here and they die in the winter. A perennial, herbaceous perennials, they grow from the ground, they grow up, and then they die back in the winter. Some of them do, some of them stay alive. But then in the spring, they come up again from that root crown. So a perennial, not all of them are super long-lived, but most of them are quite long-lived, and you plant it once and it's there for years, and it might spread some. You might be able to divide, take off a piece and plant somewhere else, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
And so this is purely for pleasure, aesthetics, color, right, for you?
Yeah.
And there's different styles of gardening, right? I mean, there's some that are maybe more formal and more structured and like things are in a row and that kind of thing.
Right.
And that can be very beautiful.
Sure.
And then there's ones that are more, a little bit more wild and a little bit more random and a little bit more, they get really full and that kind of thing. So what's your aesthetic in terms of that?
That's funny. It's also shifted, right?
Yeah.
That potager I put in when I was 20, I had little strawberry plants edging all the beds. I was really inspired by classic French and English, style little kitchen gardens. And now I was saying to Laura, man, I'm really changing because even interesting combinations of weeds by the side of the road, I'm like, oh, look at that. I love the way that chicory is next to that grass or whatever. What the heck? So I think that I really love one of the things that appeals to me most is the variety of plants that can be crammed into a space. And also the generosity of it. It's not just, sometimes with gardening, they're like, oh, put 1, 3, or 5 plants in a group so it looks aesthetically pleasing. Well, in this style of gardening, you're making a huge patch of it. You're not even counting how many plants you're putting in, Right. So that's also very appealing to me.
Yeah. And for you, is gardening therapy? Is it therapeutic for you? Is it physical? Is it, or are you just really kind of, I want a great outcome, or is it, or are you just more interested because it's a fun activity for you?
That's a great question. I think part of the process that I love, and I think maybe even love the most, is starting seeds and propagating plants. it's like you're turning nothing into something.
Right.
And you buy a packet of seeds for $4,
Right.
So I love starting seeds inside. That's another thing that's great about is it's February, March when everybody's starting to go crazy,
Yeah.
And I had this huge, when I was doing the flower farm, I had this huge setup actually in the basement of the restaurant because I don't have a good garage or basement space. And I had racks of plants and lights. And so I know my employees probably thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
So I love that part. And I love the kind of composition and thinking about where you're going to put things. So, yeah, I mean, I think I will say one of the, once it starts to be the middle of July, I'm not excited to work outside in the garden. So I feel like there's this ticking timer of when you have spring fever, how long can it last while I'm manically working out in the garden? Then after that, it's a pause until fall. So I do like to work in the garden, but I don't want to suffer too much.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know, a lot of people, it's exercise.
Sure.
It's being outside.
Sure.
It's a process that's
Yes.
fun. The actual physical, gardening.
No, yeah.
Is a lot of fun for them. It certainly has been for my wife over the
Yeah.
years, who doesn't have any time to do it now.
Right.
But and is your garden at all, whether it's home or someplace
Mm-hmm.
else, supplying your restaurant at all?
Last year, I did supply the restaurant with some herbs
Okay.
because one of the ideas I had for the flower farm was to grow a bunch of herbs and then dry them and turn it into tea for the shop. I didn't quite make that whole connection, so that's on pause. But we did have a lot of fresh herbs, basil, chives, oregano, that kind of thing that we used. Rosemary. Oh my gosh, we use rosemary like crazy at the
Yes.
shop. And that's a goal to do more of, but it's also just one of those things that's, there has to be somebody to manage it. You know what I mean? We just started composting at the shop a year ago. That's always been a value of mine, but I needed an employee to
do it.
to take ownership, and she's doing great now.
Good.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about sort of move into the more public garden idea, because that was one of the things when we were emailing back and forth about what do you want to talk about, and you mentioned you said this thing. You said, hang on a sec, and you might have just mentioned one. You said having had transformative experiences in public gardens. So, and it sounds like you had one in Lurie, in Chicago.
Yeah.
Have there been other examples of that?
Well, I just think in general, I mean, I remember going to the Rose Garden in Allentown when I was a kid. You know what I mean? Like we traveled to Michigan, and there's actually a really new but very cool public garden in Traverse City. And I just think it's so generous and cool that there are public gardens, and they so frequently involve volunteers.
Right.
And I don't know. I think it's really special. And I think it's also special, like, when I was in the Lurie Garden and there were other people coming in, like, you could tell there were other people like me who had no idea what they were walking into when they just happened to be going down this path. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like you're having this experience by yourself, but there's other people experiencing it as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think especially in large cities, public gardens or even just green spaces, right, play such a huge role.
Right.
Like if you could imagine Manhattan without Central Park, right? I mean,
my
come
gosh.
on.
Right.
Nobody could possibly live there.
Right.
If
Yeah.
that was all filled in.
Right.
Like, oh my God, it would be a nightmare.
Yes.
So that really just is a really big public garden, and there's millions of gardens in Chicago and parks and
Right.
And lots of examples. And I think for me, the most recent one, which has been a real success, and you mentioned, is the High Line in New York City, where they took an old elevated rail and turned it into this path that goes for 20 blocks or so. It's pretty long, and there's beautiful plants on both sides, some perennials, some grasses, some, and it kind of meanders and wanders, and there's places to sit. And even though it's not particularly wide, it's this incredible oasis in the city. And it's just wonderful to walk through it and stop and wherever you want. And I think that sort of thing makes such a difference in the life of a city or a town. And so here we are in Little Berea, Kentucky, right? And how do you think about that in terms of what's happening in Berea? Like, do you wonder or maybe there is a public space that you really enjoy? I mean, there's the campus, right? Which is beautiful.
Sure.
But in terms of just the city of Berea, are there any garden spaces?
That's interesting you say that, because before you said the campus, of course, like I love the little spaces behind Draper Building.
Yeah.
Like even those they're special, and like think how many thousands of people have appreciated them.
Yeah.
You know.
There's even fish back there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that in Berea, we don't have as many like specifically cultivated spaces. I think that we do have some green spaces.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent so many hours down at the creek by the Quaker Meeting House with my boys when they were kids. And so like that kind of space, or the Stevenson Trail, you know, it's not necessarily a garden, but it's a public space outside that people are interacting with nature.
Right.
And I think I haven't been involved directly at all, but I really admire what the group of volunteers with the Berea Pollinator Gardens are doing. They're putting in gardens down by the dog park and that kind of thing. And I think that they have some visions to do more gardens along the paths, which I think is super cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think more. It's interesting because it's like we're not Manhattan. We have nature all around us.
Absolutely.
But I do think that sometimes we can just take it for granted and drive by the trees, you know?
Well, yeah, and I think there's this idea, and it sort of goes back to this third space idea, right? That if you're not intentional about that kind of thing, you can wind up having sort of no spaces that people want to hang out in, create community in, whether it's your restaurant or whether it's a green space or a bike path or whatever it might be. And so many places are not intentional about that kind of thing these days. And so you wind up on these sort of faceless, nameless streets that have lots of fast food restaurants, and that's about it, right?
Right.
So I think you do have to work at it, right? You have to be intentional about it. Of course, in these big cities, it's almost like, you know, there's no choice because it's survival. And if they don't keep up those green spaces, they're going to be intolerable to live.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, thinking about the cost of putting in stuff like that. You know what I mean? They're even for the, you know, on city council, already thinking about like asking to do a little project in the public park or that kind of thing. Like that's not a nothing ask. Like you'd have to, you know, so thinking about those logistics, but also it feels like, you know, I love my beautiful garden in my yard and I'm happy for my neighbors to see it, but also how many people, I mean, it's benefiting me and my family and I'm super grateful for it, but just the kind of exponential impact of several people, multiple people working on a project like that. It's so powerful.
Yeah. And so when you think about a great public garden, what has to be there? Like, what are the elements of a really good, I know it sounds like sort of a simple question, but I don't think it is. Like, what are the elements of a really good, successful public garden?
Well, I think there needs to be water, a sense of enclosure, or like not just plunked down in the middle of a field. I think there has to be parts that are not exposed to the sun, like some parts that are in the shade or some shelter. I think there should be places to sit. And I'm thinking about all, you know, the places that I've been. There's a really great little public garden in Billings, Montana, where my nieces live and my brother and his wife. So we visit there. It's small, right? But it's just got like a little fountain and some really pretty plantings and some. So I think those things. What else? I mean, I think that one of the things that I feel discouraged about traditional landscaping, and this isn't castigating anyone, it's just saying it's traditional, is like the gravel with some shrubs aesthetic, because it's easy to maintain and it's easy for people who don't love plants to like wrap their head around it, right? And so I think even just shifting some of the spots in town or at businesses or whatever to just be a little bit more thoughtful about it. It doesn't have to be a huge big garden. You know what I mean? Because I think it will start to shift people's kind of perception of what's possible.
I think too there's this sort of idea of discovery, right? Where you turn a corner and
Exactly.
there's look at that. Like there's a little glade or a place to sit.
Yes.
And you didn't know it until you got there.
Right.
And it feels like you discovered
Yes,
it, right?
totally.
Although you know you didn't.
No,
but like
totally.
It just feels like, oh, cool, look at that. It's a little private spot where I can rest.
Yes.
Or
The
some- you know.
Arboretum in Lexington has like have you been there? Like they've got a
No.
great little path It feels very much like that. Like
Yeah.
you come across a little pond. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think here we are in Kentucky, which is especially this spring, a very wet place, right?
Yeah.
We don't have a water problem here.
No, not right now.
There isn't a lot of other places, but not here.
Right.
So, do you think about that in terms of preservation and how we're using water and
Sure.
and all that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think so. There's this guy named Roy Diblick who grew most of the plants for the Lowry Garden, and his business is in Minnesota. And he wrote a book called The No Maintenance Garden, but it's KNOW maintenance. And his whole premise of this style of perennial garden is like right plant, right place. And so he doesn't even think you should add compost to the soil when you're putting in a perennial garden. He thinks what you need to do is observe the soil, observe what's around the ecosystem, the climate, everything, and then plant plants that are going to love it there.
Right.
And of course, it sounds like common sense, but that's what I'm trying to do with my home garden now. And I think that that's what needs to happen for gardens to be resilient to what's going on. I mean, that's what I mentioned, though. They had sprinklers up in the Lowry Garden. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure they tried to design it that way as well. And it can only go so far, that the capacity of plants. But I think being thoughtful about what you're planting, and, it's not surprising, I guess, but like, they sell plants at nurseries locally or at Lowe's that are not going to do well here. Lupins don't want to grow here, And so I think being knowledgeable about the plants that you're planting and the conditions of the soil and stuff, I think play a role in that.
Yeah. And we lived in Durango, Colorado for a few years, which is a pretty dry place. It's sort of where the mountains meet the desert, kind of. And everyone has a lawn. And people are trying to grow all kinds of plants, but we were like, let's just, because if you walk around, you see things growing that are just like going crazy,
right?
And you're like, oh, that works here.
What's that?
Like, what is that?
Yeah.
It's kind of pretty.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? And you just kind of try to figure that out and not try to force something. So is your perennial garden replacing like a lawn, or?
So it's fun. I actually, during COVID, I put in kind of a potager style. I wanted to have like a more traditional, like perennial border, and then have some larger beds that were vegetables and herbs. And so I put that in during COVID. I put pea gravel paths during it, or in the middle of the beds. But I just wasn't enjoying it. And that's what I took out to kind of put. And also, our yard is quite small. And I said to my husband, like, we could turn this whole yard into garden. And he was totally game, too. So we're working on that. So it's a big patch. It's like 15 feet by maybe 60 feet in my front yard. So,
and your neighbors will be okay with it?
I mean, my neighbors are used to me being kind of a hot mess as far as yard maintenance. But there's also some gardeners close by. So they know it's a work in progress. Because right now it does look pretty scrappy.
Yeah.
But yeah, my neighbors are lovely.
Well, I grew up in a very suburban kind of environment where the houses were fairly close together, but also had, good sized yards.
Yeah.
And if somebody wasn't mowing their lawn all the time, or had something pretty in the front yard, or the trees were, people would like, they didn't like that, and because they think their home values are going to go down or something. But that seems like that whole mindset feels like it's got to change.
I wouldn't do well in a neighborhood like that. But it's definitely a work in progress this year. But I think next year it's going to be better. And it's funny that you mentioned grasses for the Highline, because that's one of the things I learned the most when I've been doing all this research about different plant types for this style of gardening. So, most perennial gardens, it's just herbaceous perennials, maybe some roses, maybe a few boxwoods or shrubs or that kind of thing. Not a lot of grasses.
Right.
Maybe like an impact statement, one big grass or something. But one of the things that I think defines the aesthetic of the new perennial gardens is multiple types of grasses. Yeah. And also leaving things up all winter things are supposed to be interesting, like while they're blooming, but also interesting and aesthetically pleasing when they're dead. And so it's really about the shape and the structure of the garden as well, which I just find that's not something that, well, first of all, the suburban folks wouldn't like that very much, but it's not something I really was striving for in earlier years of gardening, but it actually feels so right, kind of, to be thinking about that.
Yeah, and so you're thinking about not just color and all that, but also tall, how
Yeah.
short, leggy, full,
Yeah.
bushy, like all
Spiky.
that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned you've mentioned a couple of gardens along the way here. So if people live in this area, where are there cool, if you know, where are there cool public gardens that are sort of like within a drive?
Well, so it's not public. You also have to pay, but Udell is a really cool spot up in Crestwood, Kentucky, outside of Louisville. That is a home and former nursery of, I can't remember his name, but it was a production nursery, and the guy was basically a genius, I think. And he and his wife built the house out of stone, and then they built this like little chapel and all these really dear buildings. And that's a garden that you can visit now. That's really lovely. It's not
Udell?
huge. It's Yewdell. Yeah. And he was really a plantsman and a nurseryman, and I think that is definitely what I identify with the most from the gardening perspective. Like, I love learning about new plants. I'm trying to teach myself the Latin names for all the plants that I'm working with right now because I've never done that. And just that sense of discovery and like learning about new plants and seeing them bloom for the first time and like having a relationship with these plants, that kind of thing. Right. So that's a great spot. The Lexington Arboretum or the Kentucky Arboretum in Lexington. I think, I don't know that it's a garden, but I think Mickler's Kentucky Native Cafe, that's a lovely spot to have a beer. And I love the age of Mickler's, or Pemberton's is also a nursery in Lexington. That is just visiting that and like these, 100-year-old businesses with these old glass greenhouses, like, just love it.
Yeah. I've been to the Kentucky Native Cafe one time, and it does have that element of like discovery when you walk in there, because it's right in the middle of the city.
Yes, it's crazy.
And you walk in there, and it's like, oh my gosh, look, there's all these plants and picnic tables, and it's very cool. It's a really cool place to get a drink or cheap food, but good food.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Good place to visit. Well, that's awesome. So what are you thinking going forward here? Like, how much of, the gardening thing for you, is it more than a hobby? Is it sort of something that kind of takes over your life, or are you trying to keep it, sort of in the corner somewhere?
I think it's probably still a hobby.
Yeah.
So I've never traveled internationally.
Okay.
And my husband and I just got our passports for the first time because I'm 48 and I really want to travel internationally before I turn 50. And my main goal traveling internationally is to visit gardens. Like, I have a list, I have an itinerary.
What are some?
Or different cool nurseries. Well, I was thinking about England, which I know it's basic to go to England for the first time that you travel internationally, but there's so many gardens. And one of the things about the new Perennial movement, and I'm new to learning about this, so I could very well also be misspeaking, but it feels like the people who are famous for doing it and the people who are doing it the most right now are a lot of men. And I wonder, like, where are the women in this movement? Or, actually the Lurie Garden, the main staff are women right now, but like, are there designers who are being known for this style of garden and are women? And I haven't found a ton. But Beth Chatto, are you familiar with? So she was a gardener. I think she started in the 70s, but she basically was one of the grandmothers, without knowing it, of this style of gardening and working with a site. And she basically turned like a gravel pit into a beautiful garden. And she's not alive anymore, but her garden is on the southwestern side of England, and I thought that would be a really great place to start. And then I charted around, and Pete Aldolf has also designed some gardens there. There's Hauser and Worth, which is an art museum. He's designed a garden there that's supposed to be really special. There's actually some really cool nurseries I want to go to, even though I know probably you're not supposed to take plants out of the
But you've done a lot of research, it sounds like.
Yeah, I made a whole itinerary.
Right. So
Yeah.
And you mentioned Pete Aldolf a couple of times.
Yeah.
And was he the driver behind the Highline?
Yeah, he was the designer.
Okay.
And I can't remember if that was his first garden in the U.S. or not. Yeah. But he's also, like, right now they're installing in one of his gardens. He's in Philly right now, the Calder Museum, which incidentally, all those tapestries that are hanging up at Hutchins are Calder's, which is so cool. I've always loved that. But there's a Calder Museum in Philly, and he's putting in a garden there right now. There's a new garden of his, relatively new in the last few years, in Detroit, that's not that far away from us. It's on Belle Isle.
Okay.
I think that would be really fun to go to.
Yeah. And
then there's also I can't remember what the university, if it's Iowa University, but there's a guy named Kelly Norris who is a faculty member at a university in Iowa, and there seems to be a lot of energy around this style of gardening in Iowa, which is he's kind of one of the people in the U.S. that's really a leader. So
if you're going to England, you have to go to London because there's just it's nothing but
Kew
everywhere.
right?
There's Kew and just Regent's Park in London is just filled with beautiful. There's a rose area that's just unbelievable. And do you know about Sissinghurst?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, that's on the list.
Okay.
Because that's actually pretty close.
Well, that's a woman. I mean, Vita Sackville
that's
West,
true.
I think,
Right.
was the person
Yes,
who
yes.
developed that. And I don't think we've been there, but you know, anytime there's a show on public television like Gardens, my wife will be watching.
I love it.
So,
yeah.
Those are really amazing places to go.
Yeah.
So this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate this time, and you know, it's sort of the perfect. I've been saying this as I do this. Every time I do this, there's a couple things happen. One, there's a strong connection to another podcast or another topic, like the way you're talking about gardening and the process and the sort of aesthetics meeting productivity is very similar to couple conversations I've had about watches, about craft, about poetry, about that the process leads to something beautiful, and maybe functional too, right? And then I just learned so much, and it's so great to talk to somebody like you who's very passionate about this topic, right? It comes through. You know, we could sit here for hours and keep talking about
You're very gracious.
about gardens, and you know, maybe someday we'll do it again after you come back from your trip.
That would be great. We can debrief.
Bring pictures, although this is not in video, but you know, we can talk about that. It would be really, really fun. So, if you could recommend something to listeners about sort of gardens or gardening, a place to visit, or a way to garden, or a plant, like what would you tell them? Just sort of just kind of like, you know, wrap this whole thing up.
Well, easily, I mean, first, which is obvious, I would say go to a garden. Find a garden somewhere that's not yours. That's a public garden, and try to sneak in or go in for real. And then also, I think really more related to the joy of growing plants, because I have gotten so much from that, is get a 4-foot shop light, get a few flats, and start some seeds next spring. Like, it's so easy to start plants inside, and it's so rewarding and saves so much money. So if people are even remotely interested, I think they'll see a huge return on their investment.
Right. Excellent.
So,
well, best of luck. Continued luck with your restaurant.
Thanks.
As I've said, it's really become a community cornerstone, I think. You should be very proud of that.
Thank you.
And just again, thanks so much for this great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, Katie.
Bye.
What I Really Want to Talk About is produced and recorded in the studios of Berea College News and Radio in Berea, Kentucky. You can learn more about this podcast and listen to all of the previous episodes at whatIreallywantotalkabout.com. My contact information is on the website, so please get in touch with me if there is something that you really want to talk about. I'm Tim Monroe. Thanks for listening.